too many times we do the wrong things, and I did the wrong thing before this show. I did a show before this. And so I'm talked out. Hopefully all of our guests and co-hosts will just take over. I can sit back and enjoy more coffee and whatever is in that glass sitting next to me when I'm off camera, okay? And so tonight we hope to nuance a bit. I met a young man the other day via a phone call. It was a wonderful phone call. We got to chat maybe an hour, hour and a half, something like that, I'm guessing. Didn't look at the clock, but it was a meaningful conversation. His name is Anthony Magnabosco. And this guy, he's in transition. That is what he believed 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Don't hold that against him. I mean, he keeps looking at better models of this and that. And so that's what this show is about. It's not about throwing people under the bus. It's about thinking and rethinking and rethinking and rethinking. And so I think that I've made my point to a certain degree. And so with that said, let me get Bob Graves in here. Hello, Bob.
Hello. Greetings. You know, I just dropped my iPad to the floor.
That's not good.
But yeah, I was trying to put it on the table. But fortunately, it landed on its backside, so I think it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Good to be here. I've been looking forward to this show ever since you told me it was a possibility.
Yeah, I actually got to watch a few videos, not many, I think 3 to be exact. That is of Anthony doing his out in the public interviews, and I've been very impressed. I mean, he goes back and forth with a lot of kindness, and so I'm going to give him 2 thumbs up for that. So many people...
Now, you sent me a video. Was that one of Anthony in it?
Right.
Okay, all right, okay. So I have seen the guy. All right.
So we're going to be talking with Anthony here in a few minutes. Before we get to Anthony, let me bring in Stephen. Stephen, hello.
Hey, how are you?
Well, it's almost like you disappeared off the face of the earth. I mean, so many people miss you in the philosophy of the place.
Sorry, kind of breaking up.
I said, so many people think that you just disappeared, you know, like Jesus did.
I did, but apparently I guess I rose again. Waiting in 3 days.
Yeah, you took a little bit longer than 3 days, but you're back again, and we're so thankful to have you back. You add a lot to the discussion when it comes to epistemology, philosophy, and I really like talking to you about doxastic things, and even I'd like to get into a little bit of the structure of sub- and non-doxastic issues when it comes to faith ventures. That would be interesting if we have time enough. But it's wonderful to have you back. Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this one quite a bit.
Yeah, it should be very, very good. Diana, it's always a delight. You've got a new shirt on.
Yes, I do, Dr. Jones. My favorite baseball team, the Washington Nationals. I'm old enough to remember the Washington Senators before they moved to Arlington and became the Texas Rangers. So I was thrilled, absolutely thrilled when baseball came back to Washington, D.C. in 2005. And I'm looking to get to one of the games week before my birthday.
There you go.
And yeah, whenever I go to PNC Park, I'm not going to see the Pirates. I'm going to see the opposition. And it's great to have you here, Anthony. I've been looking forward to this so much. And it's really wonderful to have a chance to talk with you.
Before we bring Anthony on, I want you to introduce your cat. I mean, everyone's going to be asking about your cat.
And here's Sylvia. Sylvia says hi. Hi there. She's a good kitty. She's the bestest kitty. She's not always nice, but she's a good kitty.
Bob, what was that song? I think it was Sylvia's Mother or something like that.
Yes.
What was the name of the band that did that?
Was it Dr. Hook?
Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show, correct. Yeah, that was a good song, good band. That's an oldie.
Yes,
showing our age.
Yeah.
Well, okay, let's keep moving along. Before we bring Anthony in, I want to say hello to Jordan. We also have Jordan and Daryl will join in just a few minutes, but say something. Jordan, hello.
Hey, it's good to be back on the grid.
Well, that's good. You're putting that powerful voice into that microphone tonight. That's always impressive.
I like this mic so much.
Okay, that's wonderful. Hey, Anthony, lots of people are bragging about you. I mean, you're going to atheist conventions left and right. What's going on?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me on your show. Yeah, I've been kind of caught up in this whirlwind of attention. A lot of people are noticing the street epistemology videos that myself and others have been uploading. And I think they're starting to see some of the benefit of asking these types of Socratic questions. And I've been asked to either give a talk or a workshop or both sometimes at a variety of different conferences. The most recent one was in Dallas called the Faithless Forum. But prior to that was a big one in Oklahoma City, the American Atheist Convention, where close to 800 people, I think, showed up at that convention. And a lot of them for the first time were exposed to this approach, this more friendly Socratic approach of having conversations with people, God believers included. And I think it's catching people's attention. I think they're watching the videos and really they're finding something special in them. And it's really nice to be on your show to talk to you about it as well as your viewers.
Well, thank you so much. Before we get into the secondary things, let's get into the primary things. Let's talk about your flowers.
Okay, going right for the hard questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, those are beautiful.
What would you like to know about them? I think
Just pull them forward a little bit. I want to see some of those. I mean, those are awesome.
I'm afraid if I move them,
Okay, don't move them. Just describe
I'll
them.
move them a little closer.
Wow.
Oh, they smell good too. They really do. Yeah.
Love that.
Sort of when I go on a live stream or something, I like to have some fresh flowers in the background, and I just like the way that these looked. And hey, this is a big show to be on, and I thought, well, let me get the best flowers that are out there.
You know, every time that I take my wife out to eat, I'm judging the food not just by how it tastes. I like to judge it by texture. I like presentation. If they put it on my plate, it looks like hell, I'm going to say, I don't believe in hell, so take it back. And so I'm very, very picky. And so Bob knows. He came to Pensacola, and he put all the chefs here in Pensacola out of business. But he griped too much about the alligator, so we sent him back to New York. He brought 17-degree weather into Pensacola itself. And you'd have to believe in God after that, because Bob is God.
Oh, I knew that something was not going to work right. When I first got there, we went to a Chinese restaurant. And I asked them how many flavors of soda they had, and she said, well, she listed them, and there was 5. And I said, well, I'll take a glass where you put a little bit of each one in there, and I'll have a Pensacola. And they didn't understand.
Over their heads, maybe.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah,
let's
it's funny
jump.
Because after I'm done on these live streams, I don't just throw the flowers out. They go out on the kitchen table, and then my family marvels at the fact that I just bought flowers for the family. And at some point, I'm going to have to break it to them that I'm actually using it for these podcasts.
There you go.
Yeah. Have you ever watched the movie The Paper Chase?
Oh, that sounds really familiar.
Okay, it's an
Did
old
they turn it
movie.
into a series?
Yes, about law students.
What was that guy's name? The old guy, John something.
I
was
can't even
professor.
remember the gentleman's name, but it became, I think he won an award for being the best actor in that particular movie, but he claimed in the movie that he was using the Socratic method. I don't think that he was. He did to a degree, but it was like he was repurposing, some terms there. But it was an interesting movie, to say the least. What impressed you? Where did you get your mindset when it came to the Socratic method?
Well, for myself, I started having conversations with believers and using the aggressive counter-apologetic approach. Let me show you the evidence that demonstrates how mistaken you are. And when you do that with family members, people that you love, and even strangers that you don't know, you tend to learn fairly quickly that it's kind of difficult to make headway if a person isn't willing to be open to your evidence. So after having damaged several relationships that I'm still trying to repair to this day, honestly, I discovered this approach that was written by a philosophy professor, Peter Boghossian, and he called it street epistemology. where you're using Socratic questioning to challenge people's belief foundation. And I thought, well, if this is an effective way to have a conversation, better than what I've been doing, then I should at least give it a try. And before I did that, I wanted to see examples of people doing it, and there were no video examples at all. And that's what prompted me to go out and strap on a camera and initiate chats with people to practice this method and see if it really had any legs. And 5 years later, as I look back and we see the examples and we see the interest that it seems to be getting, it does seem like there is something there. So I guess to answer your question, seeing the effectiveness of simply asking people questions about what they believe, why, and how they're so sure seems to be a heck of a lot more effective than presenting people with evidence to show that they're mistaken on a view.
What would you mean by effective, if I could ask?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so effective in my view is seeing a person slow down to think about their belief, actually watching for those spider moments where somebody, actually looks up into the sky and is like, yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know how I can justify that belief. Them wanting to meet again, them being so enthralled with the questioning that you were using that they want to go out and learn it. And maybe even on that list, not necessarily like my number 1 or number 2, but maybe my number 10th one, my number 9th one perhaps, is if a person realizes that their belief is not based on a solid foundation, lowering their confidence in that belief would also be a success. But it's not. If you asked me that 5 years ago, that may have been my number 1 or number 2. I want to have a conversation with a person, ask them questions, and see them move in terms of their confidence that something is true. But I was just talking to Jordan about this beforehand. Like I think my view and my goals, my objectives have matured as I've been using this method more and more.
Now, for the folks at home,
Yeah.
do I remember that you are not necessarily applying this exclusively to religious beliefs? Do I remember you talking to people about, for example, space aliens or, there was one person I think you had mentioned with whom you were speaking, and that person actually went from a Dawkins level 7 to about a 6.5 as far as her atheism was concerned. She was a less hard atheist than she was before she started talking to you?
So yeah, to answer your question, Diana, these days I ask people to pick a deeply held belief that they think is true. 4 years ago, I went right for the God belief because that was my area of interest. So because this approach of street epistemology, I think, can be used for any type of belief claim, position of confidence, however you want to look at it, I encourage people to pick a belief, but I want them to pick something that is important to them, that is somewhat tied to their identity. Because I have had conversations with people who are atheist, and they're like, yeah, I just don't really care one way or the other. Or they want to talk about how paper bags are better than plastic, but they're just not vested in it, and it just doesn't make for a good, compelling, interesting example of this approach. So I try to ask people to pick something that's very tied to their belief. I have had talks with atheists who have moved off of their certainty that there is no God. To answer your question, yeah.
I would think that if I were to assess for myself what I think of as the effectiveness of it, is that it helps people to see that they can have this sort of discussion in a non-hostile context. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's very, very helpful. One thing that I do, this may be, I may be the odd man out with this. I don't think that beliefs of any sort are ever solid, because if they were, they wouldn't be beliefs. They'd be things that people know. And so, and not that, but I really think that that reason and rationality is much overstated. I think that we have gut feelings and instincts that are based on we don't even really know what, and that we spend most of our effort rationalizing in that direction, defending our unrealized predisposition. And as a result, I would think that no matter what a person's beliefs were that they held passionately, be it political, religious, or whatever, that there would be this moment of, well, and those spider moments, as you say, because I think that we have fooled ourselves into thinking that our thoughts and our ideas are more circumspect and more thought through than they really are.
That seems to be my experience too, in having conversations with more than likely over 1,000 people. And I don't upload every conversation, but there are hundreds on my channel. And to your earlier point, I do think that one of the reasons why people are this approach is getting people's attention, not only because it seems to be effective based on a variety of different ways we define that, but it is polite. And people aren't used to seeing, perhaps with the exception of your show, because I've seen your show a couple of times, it's unusual to see a respectful dialogue between parties on sensitive topics, especially the big questions of life. And to see somebody respectfully asking questions and peeling back the layers and the justifications for these beliefs, and to see those moments of reflection and to see it end on good terms. You don't normally see that. And that is something that's woefully needed in the atheist community. We mentioned, I gave a talk to the American Atheists almost 3 weeks ago now. And I titled it Street Epistemology, a Turning Point for Atheism, because I think a lot of atheists are realizing this is quite possibly a better approach when we're having one-on-one talks, as opposed to arguing with somebody or demeaning them or ridiculing them even. And we have lots and lots of examples of that online. And we don't have many examples of the more cordial approach, unfortunately.
Although I do like a good fight, but I always feel guilty afterwards.
Yeah, there is something to be said for watching the passion of two people arguing their position. And sure, maybe neither of them would change their mind or reflect on their belief. But the people watching, well, there's that entertainment factor, and they get 1 million views.
Right.
And viewers can possibly change their mind after watching it.
It's possible, yeah. I tend to think of most debates as being the Worldwide Wrestling Federation version of a discussion.
Yeah, it's almost, there's a degree of acting to it, I think, in those instances.
And there's that gotcha moment, and of course, it's really the skill of being able to say something your opponent doesn't quite know how to deal with the nuance, and you have to set them up so that they get invested in an idea that they may have stated, and they got to be careful that they don't say anything that might seem like it contradicts it. And so, in a sense, not always, but more often than not, I get the impression that these debates are really just a game.
Yeah.
And you can learn things in them. I've learned things during debates. Because I learn more things by reading, studying, having discussions. And I usually change my mind when I'm contemplating things by myself after having read or having had a discussion. I rarely am changing my mind in the midst of just such an encounter.
Mm-hmm. I'd be a little alarmed if somebody just completely abandoned a deeply held belief after a 10-minute talk with me. And you mentioned talking about gotchas. If you've watched the video of the woman with Joanna, you said that you've watched 3 videos, and I think that may have been one of them. At one point, she says, "Oh, you got me," and she was kind of at a loss for explaining how she could be so sure that her God was real. And when she said it, I immediately thought, "Ooh, I don't want to get you. This isn't about trapping you. This is about helping you reflect on a belief, and then yes, go home and think about it." So little things like that. I'm not trying to trap or trick people when we're having these talks. I do want them to think about it. And like you said, I think a lot of those deep thoughts come long after the talk is over.
When you're having conversations with people, when you ask questions like, do you have a belief? Do you ever define belief, that is, in how you've asked the question? What you mean by belief? In other words, when you ask the question, what is your belief? What does belief mean to you?
That's a good question. So this might be helpful to sort of, give you a little bit about my background. I'm a lay person. I've never formally studied philosophy or academic epistemology or anything like that. I'm a lay person talking to lay people, trying to use lay people terms. In fact, if you looked at like the first 2 years of my videos, I think I would unintentionally use belief and knowledge as synonyms. And now having had talks with folks like yourself and and experts like Ozzy, for example, come forward, and people even commenting on videos, you start realizing how little you really don't know. Or is that the word I'm looking for? I'm not sure. But it's kind of a humbling experience when you start realizing the differences in these words. To answer your question, I tend to ask a person, I'm interested in how people are forming views of reality, the beliefs that you hold, things that you think are really true. That's probably how I would define it.
You let them define belief.
Yeah, and I actually try to encourage them to pick that belief too. I don't think I've ever encountered somebody here in Texas and maybe some of the other cities where I've done this, where somebody got hung up on, well, before we go any further, what do you mean by belief? Now, that does happen on some of the other suitcase words like faith and confidence.
Well, let me stop you right quick, because so many of the apologists out there, they tend to, ask questions that are very open-ended without clarification, and a lot of equivocating starts happening quickly, and so, you're not talking apples and apples. And so I'm not trying to pin you, I'm just trying to clarify, because, you have a very humble approach, and I appreciate that. And one of the things that I like about the Socratic method, both, let's say, the person asking the questions and the person answering the questions, they should be both in the learning position. I think Socrates would say, thumbs up, let's both learn. Everybody's a student here. That would be wonderful if people would think that way. And so on this show, hopefully everyone here is a student and not so arrogant as to think that, we have a know-it-all here. But, for the sake of just being clear, if I'm talking to an apologist, let's say a Calvinist, what they mean, that is, in their determinate nomenclature within their little ism, if I'm on the same page with them, I can, get to the details or get to the semantics a little bit quicker. And so is that important to you, or do you mainly deal with just surface structure and no deeper structure?
Mm-hmm. Understanding the meaning of words is extremely important when you're having these talks. So I don't tend to get stuck on how the person is using the word belief, especially if perhaps at the start I say, let's talk about something that you think is true. It usually seems to be adequate for establishing what the person believes or what their claim is. I might even say, is something bugging you? Are you here at the trail today to get something off your chest? And they might, in the course of a little rapport building, might make a claim. So, I don't get too hung up on words, but they are important, especially like if a word like faith comes up. What I have found though is that when I'm interviewing somebody and I'm using street epistemology, my definition of a word or what I think a word should be is not really important. I'm willing to accept, for the purpose of a conversation, their definition of belief, their definition of faith, for example, if it comes up. I don't even like bringing these words up, these big suitcase words. I don't even say, is faith a component to this belief? I want them to surface the reasons on their own and then provide their own definitions. And then I'll write down their definitions and I'll go with that. I don't like forcing definitions of words on people, especially when it comes to these beliefs, because if a person discovers that their belief, depending on how they define these words and what their claim is based on an unreliable methodology, and we've done that using their words and their definitions and their methodology, then that's all on them. That's all on them to figure out, do I need to lower my confidence in this belief? Do I need to discard this belief outright? Do I maybe increase my confidence in this belief? I'm not out there to play word games with people. I'll go with whatever.
I guess the reason that I'm asking, if I'm talking with an individual and they say they have faith, let's look at all the different usages of faith. Sometimes faith is very much in the context of belief. But sometimes, if you look at a gentleman by the name of Tennant or Alston and others who have written extensively about sub- and non-doxastic faith venture sets, they seem to articulate an argument that would suggest that you can have faith without belief. And so it's not always true that maybe faith and
although I
belief
don't think that's the
is
kind of
equivalent.
thing that a person might have a strong belief about. I mean, for example, I might have confidence that a particular method, if I used to do guitar repair, I might have confidence that a particular method for repairing something is reliable, but I might not believe it's the best way to do it. I might not know if there's a better way, or I might think there's a better way, I just can't do it. So, I mean, there is that kind of confidence, if that's what you're referring to. And I think it demonstrates, though, that that human beings are capable of a wide variety of nuanced confidences that are not necessarily tethered to a truth claim.
But
Some things seem to have use value, and that's good enough.
in other words, if I look at Tenet's work, he seems to think that faith is it's an adoption, namely of a line of conduct not warranted by present facts that involves experimenting with the possible or ideal, venturing into the unknown and taking the
Right.
risk of disappointment and defeat. In other words, when you look carefully at Hebrews chapter 11:1, it's almost as if faith is the evidence hoped for. And in that sense, it would be non-doxastic. It would be
Right.
not a belief,
Yeah.
but it would be just simply, you know what I'm saying? It's
It's
working.
not the evidence of things hoped
Yeah.
for. It's the evidence hoped for.
Right.
things.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so if you look at the structure, namely of the syntax, it works in favor of I have nothing. And so what am I doing here? And so I'm working from this premise without anything. And so it's in that sense. And do you ever run across apologists in that line of thinking, Anthony?
Yeah. So the street epistemology has been getting a lot of attention, not only in the atheist community, but in the apologetics community. And folks that study this stuff and take issue with either the author's use of the word faith and definitions of those words, or the definitions of the word faith that people on the street are giving me. Pay attention very closely when I have a talk with somebody about God. They usually say the F, we call it the F-bomb because they've dropped the F-bomb. We wait for them to drop the F-bomb. We wait for them to say that word. Some people do say, okay, my definition of faith is belief. They equate the two. A lot of people will say that I believe in God. My reasons for that is because of the Bible, and the method that I've used to conclude that the Bible is a source of truth is faith. They clearly identify it as a methodology, as an epistemology, as a way to come to believe something to be true. Some people even say, I get this a lot from the apologists. The apologists, they don't touch faith with a 10-foot pole these days, it seems. It seems more that faith is something that you get after you've believed in the God, after you've seen the evidence for God and you believe it, and faith is this wonderful gift that you get upon believing and accepting Jesus into your heart or something. So It's interesting how this faith is a very, very strange word.
I can relate to part of that, in that when now I've always been a person who believed there is a God, but at the age of 18, I went to a fundamentalist college. I don't know that I could say that I believed in fundamentalism, but I was willing to give it a shot. And there's a sense in which I was putting my faith in it. But in that just meant that I was going to give it a try, and put it on for size and see what it did. And so I mean, I really did give it a good try. And if I ran into problems, I tried to see if there was a way of resolving it. And so there's a sense in which I could have used the word faith in that respect without actually claiming that I believed it. I didn't know.
I've got some layman's questions for Anthony, just a couple if you have a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
kind of captive audience anyway.
I'm not going anywhere. You got me for.
Hey, Stephen, just look at the flowers. Ask the question.
So pretty. Try and put what you said, Dr. Jones, in maybe some layman's vernacular. Let's say that belief is because of good reasons, you hold a belief. You can't really choose the beliefs that you have, but for good reasons, these things have formed in your mind, and this is how you understand the world. Faith, in terms of what Dr. Jones was saying, maybe in layman's terms, is that you have faith for good reasons. And these would be ethical or utilitarian types of things. So if I have faith that there's a God, it doesn't necessarily mean that I believe that there's a God, but I might hope that this is the situation, the state of affairs, and my conduct in just assuming that that is the case may have some kind of value to me. I think a lot of people will approach faith when you're maybe having these conversations, from what I've seen on the video, is they'll tell you, well, I believe this, not necessarily as an academic propositional enterprise, but I grew up this way. I've got a social network that's all, and these don't really have anything to do with beliefs, really. It has to do with why you're engaged in this sort of social activity. And that's one theory of what belief is anyway. But the other thing for my specific questions to you is, most of your videos, you're concerned about confidence, and then you're also concerned about justification. And my question would be, in one video, you admit that confidence doesn't really have anything to do with truth. You can be very confident and very wrong, or you can be hardly confident at all and be very right. And then when you're talking about justification, I just wanted to make sure that maybe we could get on the same page with justification is the same way, in that you can be highly justified to believe something and be highly wrong, and vice versa. In both senses, I think that why we want justification, and hopefully agree, is that there's an ethical obligation that we have in order to say that there's a reason why I believe what I do, and it's belief essentially is social, and that I've got to I can't just believe whatever I want. I've got to check with myself. There's an ethics to belief, privately and publicly, between each other. So I was just wondering how if you get to the point in your conversation where you actually decrease somebody's confidence down to zero, have you accomplished anything other than making them rethink? This is my biggest ethical question for you. I'm not in favor of Socratic method. I'm more participatory pedagogy is the technical term. So you do about half the job getting somebody where they're prepared to listen because they realize now that they don't have the answers. But on the other half is this big missing thing. Imagine going to the boot camp in the military, and they tear you down, and that's where they leave you. So
that's a really good way of putting it.
On the other side is maybe, okay, you can have no confidence, but you can have an experience that is affirming to what your faith hopes are, or your dispositions are. You may not be able to justify them, but they are warranted nonetheless. So there's maybe an ethical concern about, you've got them broken down. Now, how do you build them back up, or give them tools in order for them to explore the ground that you've asked them to cover? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. There's a lot. Oh, Jordan, did you want to jump in on that?
I just wanted to note, I do have something to say on that, but go ahead, Anthony.
Okay, so there's a lot there. Just really quickly, if I can remember, I was jotting down some notes. I didn't forget, but I'm horrible at this. That's why I jot stuff down. Very quickly, we're interested in what a person believes and how confident they are that it's true. That's in the meaning of words and all that. Yeah, can you assign a level of confidence to your belief? Then we like to get into the reasons or the justifications to see if the belief is warranted. And then perhaps the most important part when we're doing street epistemology is the methodology, that lower level. Did you use a reliable method to conclude that those reasons are justified in supporting the belief? So you're absolutely right. When we have these talks, you'll see video after video of us essentially peeling back all these layers to get to the raw foundation And in many cases, especially when it's a supernatural claim, here you go, ma'am, your belief is pretty much based on nothing reliable. Have a nice day. And you're right, there's a lot of tearing down going on. However, to answer your question, I think the way a person builds themselves back up is to keep asking these questions and to keep seeking out resources and to check out to look and see what the apologists have to offer and learn this method so that they can apply these questions on their own. I think the Socratic method itself is the tool that you can use to build your beliefs back up to justify that high degree of confidence. And that's why I'm such a big proponent of it. I think it's a wonderful tool for tearing down beliefs, but it's also a wonderful tool for building them back up and or perhaps edifying a belief that you've held and you realize that, yeah, that this really is based on something solid. I hope that answered your question, and maybe I'll turn it over to Jordan.
Jordan, you're muted.
Jordan.
Hello, Jordan.
Yep, sorry.
There you are.
Forgot about the button. I was writing notes. I have noticed in my discussions with people, if I do question their perspective, and they may acknowledge that there's something there, that a question that they don't quite have an answer to, it's pretty common that they will ask me for possible answers to that question, right? They'll like, well, okay, if that's a problem, what is your solution to that? And you might not even have to offer your own perspective, but even just present hypothetical ones that you don't necessarily hold to yourself, but other options to consider to answer questions. So the SE would get them to a position where they are open to other perspectives, and then if they invite you to, you can offer your own or offer them other positions to consider.
I think I'd agree with that. That SE is great for deconstructing poorly constructed beliefs. And there is a potential there to say, okay, now that we've completely demolished your belief, here is the truth. Here is a book on evolution or something like that. And that's when I think it crosses the line and you become, then you're like you're the evangelizer. Then the charges of you're just as bad as Ray Comfort out there doing this, I think could hold some merit when you start presenting your own worldview. There is a fine line though too. It could be quite distressing to realize that you've been believing something based on an unreliable epistemology, and you've just discovered this in a 20-minute talk in the woods with a stranger. That could be very tough. And while it might be tempting to provide a person with answers and cross the line where you're now evangelizing for a position, you do, I think, need to also be there for them and maybe give them resources if they need support to go through that difficult process.
I'm questioning though, what is the basis for thinking that a belief must be justifiable by the person holding it? Not all people are capable of articulating or even thinking through an argument. And some people, it's possible to believe something that might actually be true, but to not be a person skilled in arguing it. So, not only that, but I'm not a believer that human beings are anywhere near as rational as we think we are, and I do think that our intuition does serve some sort of a purpose. We seem to have one. I'm not so sure that we want to put it on a par with that which can be rationalized as so. I think it needs to be dealt with as something that is of a different quality, of a different character. But so I'm not so sure that, first of all, I'm not so sure that people out there actually have justified true belief. I think they have reasons that confirm for them what they really what they really seem to understand is working, and they may not actually fully understand the possible objections to their beliefs, and they are very comfortable with what they do have as the reasons. And it's amazing to me the kinds of things that people can find comforting as that which they think corroborates their belief. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this: I'm not so sure that I'm convinced that human beings actually possess this skill that allows for this kind of a technique to really help us to find beliefs we really, as it were, ought to have. I think that we're kidding ourselves. I think that we live in an individualistic society now. We're Westerners. We've gone through the Enlightenment. We believe in the age of reason, as it were. I wonder if we're kidding ourselves about this, and both in the way that we have overstated the value of things that we might believe, as well as the need for, because if I'm looking for a person who is, let me put it this way: if I believe that reason is better than faith, and I'm asking what somebody believes in, and I'm asking them to give me good reasons, aren't I stacking the deck in favor of the fact that I'm already assuming that reason is in some manner superior? And even if reason is superior to faith, is it also competent enough to actually counteract anything that one might have faith in that they might have faith in for good cause?
Well, isn't it though a good idea to bring to the fore with someone why they believe something? I mean, even if it is,
I guess what I'm saying is I don't think that people believe things for whys. I don't think that's why. I don't think when people believe something, they believe it for causes that are other than reasons.
Well, that's what I'm saying. In other words, even if that person says, well, I believe this because I'm afraid of the consequences if I don't, or I believe this because it's comforting to me, is it not a good idea to at least have them know that this is why they are believing it? Anthony, do you have a word to that?
What I'm trying to say is there is no why. There is no why. You're looking for a why. You're looking for something that doesn't exist and that doesn't need to exist. And I'm arguing that the cognitive operation of believing something is something that is actually caused, not something that has a why. In other words, I don't believe the things that I believe for reasons. And
I think you're onto something there, Bob, perfectly well. But it might be helpful to suggest that not only your natural sentiment, that which is not something that goes through a rational process, that influences our development of different beliefs. And part of the other side of that could be our reasoning, how we think about things, and the two come together and lead us to the beliefs. So that would mean that, yeah, sure, we're not picking our beliefs, but we have good reasons, whether they're sentimental or they're rational, that they both kind of feed into it.
I'd rather use the word causes. Let me use the example of a baby who's preverbal. You can put a baby on a bassinet that's really a glass shelf. The baby will not crawl over the glass off the bassinet willfully. What is it that the baby knows and can rationally justify that they evidently believe they shouldn't crawl over the edge of the bassinet? Why do they believe that? I don't know that there is a reason. I think it's possible that there's something about the depth perception that innately tells them there's something dangerous about it, but it's not the kind of thing that they actually possess a coherent thought about. It's an innate response to things. And I'm thinking that it's quite possible that a lot of things that people believe is somehow the resonating of something that might be within them that's innate, and they will never be able to articulate a reason for it because it's not based on a reason. It's based on some sort of innate resonation.
I think we're talking about two different kinds of whys, though. Anthony, do you have anything on this?
Yeah, this comes up every once in a while where we start to wonder, are the reasons that people are giving us for their beliefs and their confidence in that belief, is it something that they've really given a lot of thought to and those really are the reasons? Or is it really the first time that they've thought about it and this is their brain serving up this response as a justification after the fact? Like, I guess it's because I was taught it, and maybe that's really the reason for it, or maybe it's not. But I think what's important when we're having these talks with people, regardless of whether they're forming the belief naturally or there's some innate things going on, or they're put on the spot and they're just telling you the first thing that came to mind. What I think is wonderful about these chats is that because we are asking people to reflect on the methodology that they use to determine that their reasons are justified and holding a high degree of confidence in the belief, that in itself helps people move off of certainty. And that I think is
off of certainty. However, I'm thinking that I don't know that you've actually justified the fact that what you're asking them to do is something they even need to do, or that it has anything to do with whether or not they are appropriate in believing something. It's that what I'm getting at is that I think that there are some beliefs that we have that are probably, whether they're even true or not, part of just human nature. That part of our the cognitive aspects of how the brain has formed and how we've evolved, that we just they say that there's some things such as the fear of snakes tends to be a more automatic response that a person has to unlearn than the fear of something else that they have been conditioned to fear. There do be, because of this. So how does a person justify an innate fear? That they can't. But they have it, and it's a part of their nature. And I think that you're actually going to turn them into somebody neurotic to cause them to have doubts in something that might actually be part of their actual nature. And so what I'm getting at is this: I'm not so sure that justification is something that is required. Now, if somebody is believing something for a reason, then I think justification might be required. But what I'm wondering about, are there things that a person might believe for which it's a question that exists, but there is just zero method and zero reasons for going one way or the other, and yet a person might have an opinion about it. And is there anything wrong with that? And they can't justify it, but do they even need to?
Right. Well, there's the thing. I mean, I won't go out over a glass ledge, because I know that there are some observation decks that have that. CN Tower is one example. I actually made the mistake of going out on one of their observation decks, and I'm looking 1,500 feet below me, and I'm extremely frightened now.
Right. Then there's human developmental There's human developmental reasons for believing that fear is an innate one, and you can desensitize yourself to it, but it's innate. It's part of your human nature.
It's still a reason.
It's not a reason. It's a cause. I mean, unless we're going to conflate the word reason here. I mean, when we think of a reason,
I need to separate the two or something.
Right. There is a cause for something. I mean, when a piece of wood is balancing on a fulcrum and the wind comes, the wind causes the piece of wood to fall, but there's no reasoning going on. The piece of wood isn't saying, "I think I'll fall now." So,
yeah, but isn't it a good idea for me to know that I'm not going out on that glass ledge because I'm afraid of it? And now that I know that I'm afraid of it, and that's why I'm not going out there, now I can start to deal with it?
Well, sure, yes, you might be able to deal with it, but at the same time, it could be that the reason the glass is something kind of artificial. There may be an innate thing that keeps you alive, that doesn't want you to get near ledges and precarious places that you could fall. And it's probably a good thing that you would feel that way without. I mean, can you imagine if you had to teach every human being who approaches a ledge, now be careful, you could fall? Don't they seem to know that automatically without actually having to be taught? How many people just unwittingly fall over a ledge thinking, I never thought I'd fall. I mean, I've never done that before.
But I know, or at least I'm fairly sure, that glass ledge is going to hold me up, and there's no reason for me. Here we go with the conflation again. There's no good reason for me to be afraid of it, but I still am.
Well, your eyes don't give a damn about what the reality is. You see what's there. It hits you in the response. Your brain has a response based upon something that is innately hardwired into your brain based on the visual experience. And the fact that there's glass there is something that is really toying with I mean, we didn't evolve in a world that had glass, you know, and so as a result, we evolved as creatures where ledges were always dangerous like that, you know, no matter what.
Let me see if I can say something here.
Mitigated it.
It might help to make a couple distinctions with what the argument is when we're talking about knowledge, because it's such a vast conversation.
Hey,
and
Stephen,
we can narrow the scope down to.
Stephen, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hold on for a minute with the knowledge thing, because I want to get into that in a very deep way, possibly, because I think that brings up a lot of questions. But to Bob's point, real quick, would it be safe to say, Bob, what you're suggesting is this: if you're dealing with an agoraphobic, this person is just terrorized, you know, by all of these things that keep happening. He has panic attack after panic attack, and it's obvious that the person has many fallacious beliefs. And you're simply saying that this person doesn't need someone who would just interrogate them. This person needs therapy. Is that what you're suggesting?
Oh, well, in that case, I would definitely suggest that, but I wasn't suggesting that. Agoraphobia is a conditioned response. It is not an innate response.
Yeah.
So, no, I'm talking about things that would be more innate.
Okay.
And I suspect that some people, not all, but I suspect that some people have a belief in God that is based upon some sort of innate response to a sense of otherness. That doesn't mean that they are correct in that belief, but it does mean that if that belief for them becomes innate, that is the cause of their belief, and the only way they can no longer believe that is to no longer be who they are.
Yeah, but here's where I'm trying to bring Anthony and his method into this. I mean, as I've said before, could it not be a start to at least know that this is what's going on?
Oh, Anthony? Definitely. I mean, if I have something that I mean, because I'm there, as a theist, I believe in God. People ask me why. I don't really know. I've examined all the reasons, and I find all the reasons that I could perhaps enjoy fail. They do not really answer legitimate objections to why. I have no, and yet I find myself still in that condition of belief. Why? I'm not sure why. I don't know why. But so when I claim to believe in God, I'm not making a truth claim. I am instead being honest about the condition I find myself in.
How would you deal with that, Anthony?
Okay, I just have to just really quick. I think the snake thing is not innate. I think that's a learned thing. I think I just read an article about that. So
there's debate on that.
I may or may not be right on that.
Yeah. But without regard, there are certain innate. Yeah, right.
So there's so much there. Yes, okay. For myself, I want to be able to have good reasons for the beliefs that I'm holding, especially ones that I have a high degree of confidence that are true. So for example, being invited on the show, I had a fairly high degree of confidence that I was invited on it and that it would be happening today. And I have reasons for that. I had an hour and a half conversation with Michael 3 weeks ago or so. There were various texts leading up to this just to confirm the time, and with other people. I saw posts on Facebook. These are all things that verified my confidence that we would be meeting today.
Sure.
I don't.
But isn't that anecdotal? Isn't that anecdotal? I mean, I'm not arguing that kind of faith never happens. It sure does. Sure it does. I'm just saying that I think that there are some things where that doesn't apply, and I'm wondering if that's that when we get to something like God, where we lack any method for proving or disproving God, is it possible that we're really that we're now dealing with an area that where we don't really know what we're talking about, either for or against. And so are we really getting somewhere? Or are we just as we can take certain natural ideas and desensitize a person to them, the person who learns to play poker is oftentimes somebody who's learned how to hide their their facial expressions. And it takes practice to do that and determination. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm asking the question,
Sure.
I think it's okay if someone can't vocalize, the reasons or causes for why they believe something, I think that's okay. But we do like to use SE to pose the question of why, and at least it inspires them to think about it, hopefully.
Which is good, yeah, because I consider myself, well, you know, I have to define it because many people who define this differently. I consider myself a hard agnostic. I not only don't know, I believe nobody knows, and I believe it's impossible to know if there is a God. I believe there is a God, but I don't know that, and I think that that what I would have to have access to know the answer to that question is something that is beyond the capacity of being human, and I don't have it. And so therefore, I'm a hard agnostic in that sense. I don't know. I can't come up with a good reason. And I know that also I'm pretty confident that I can't come up with a good reason not to either. Although there's a lot of silly beliefs out there, I don't hold those silly beliefs.
So
That's kind of where I'm coming
like
from.
It's like a raw sense that you have, and
it's a very strong one.
Yeah, almost like what people try to describe as qualia, where you can't communicate with someone else.
It's definitely a qualia, and I've used it. In fact, I've talked about a theoqualia. You know, yeah. I've coined that. It's ever since I was a young child, I've had this sense of presence. And I had that before I even knew anything about religion. And when I went into religion, I tried to relate that, and I actually came out of religion because I found religion was so absent of what this qualia that I had, and I understand that qualia could be funny blood chemistry. I understand that could be what it is.
From my perspective, if I discovered that I was believing something that profoundly impacted how I behaved and how it affected my life, and it was based on unreliable reasons, whether I made up those reasons on the spot or these are reasons that I've sincerely thought about for the last 30 years or something like that, I would significantly lower my confidence in that belief being true. It could still be true, but my confidence would decrease. And I would hope that other people, my presupposition, I think, is that people do want to believe true things. Many people, some people don't.
That's their problem, and I think, and I would actually poo-poo that. I think that, well, what an arrogant thing. You know, you can know true things, but when you believe things, you're guessing. You know, and so let's accept it. When you believe things, you're out on a limb, and just live out on a limb. It's okay. You know, you want to believe true things. Well, don't we all? I suppose, but that strikes me as kind of silly.
Some people don't. Well, yeah. Well, I do want to believe true things, and if something was not true, or I found I had a poor reason for it, I would not believe it as much. I would be less confident that it being true, and that is a humbling discovery, Bob, to realize that there's very little that I probably know, and I need to be more open and not be as certain on these things, because it impacts how people vote and what they want taught in schools and what they want to teach their kids as being true.
Oh, definitely. And that's why I am very much opposed to the dogmatic approach to all this. I would say that my belief in God is firm, but my knowledge of it is extremely non-existent. And as a result, the last thing in the world I'd ever want to do is feel like somebody ought to believe in God, or if somebody doesn't believe in God, I have no problem with that. I mean, how can they? If they don't, they don't. And I certainly I can't give them any reason to do so. I can't, and I wouldn't want to. So just be yourself, and if it seems to emerge, wonderful. And if it doesn't, that's wonderful too. And you know what? I could be wrong. So therefore, I'm not the least bit evangelical about it, but I guess what I'm trying to say is I think that this is a question that I feel for me has come to the point where it's divorced itself from the questions. I've pursued the questions, and I've found it to get me absolutely nowhere, no matter which direction I really try to take it. So that's me. Now, the truth is, very few people are there like where I am. We can each be in a unique place. And I think there are a lot of people who have a belief in God that has been learned, acquired, socially part of what they've done, something that used to make sense to them for ridiculous reasons. And when they find this out, I think it is quite natural and appropriate for them to kind of grow out of that belief. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think Let me just say the last thing. I feel like I'm saying too much here, but the fact that I've come to this position where I'm at is part of what I think is a good thing for me to have realized that, having pursued all the possible reasons and not reasons, and that's how I got here, by really looking through these things. And so those questions really did help me, but they never robbed from me belief, ever.
It sounds to me like if what Bob is expressing here is the case, then any application to a specific God, one that you can, at least people try to insist is the true God or gods, would be really being out on a limb. I think that's kind of the issue that maybe we need to address here. Huh?
Yeah, if there is a real God out there, who that real God really is that God's problem, not mine. I'm not the least bit interested in it.
That's what I tell my mom too, who's worried about me. That put that responsibility on the God to convince me, please. Don't put it on yourself.
Oh my goodness, I so agree with you there, because given the fact, and of course I think that where you were at, you know this well. All of the reasons you hear, you can clearly hear on reasons why it isn't really that's not without its problems, and it seems to me that some of the things that people believe about God, if this was going to be a problem, how derelict and irresponsible of God to create a life form for which there are these consequences about something that just cannot be demonstrated. I mean, that's so irresponsible. I don't like that kind of notion, So yeah, if somehow it's important for you to believe in God, then that's God's problem, not yours. Yeah.
Let me jump in. I can't talk very well tonight, but you guys are forgiving me very well tonight. Thank you. Anthony has said over and over again, and I want to bring Stephen in. He stated, I want to believe what is true. And when he said that, one of the things it reminded me of, you don't remind me of Cy at all, but one of the things that Cy kept pushing on this show was, how do you know? And so the word knowledge came up. One of the things that was aggravating in that show was he was playing a shell game because his usage of no was all over the place, and he was saying, no, it's not. And so to be clear tonight, I would like to bring Stephen in and then bring Anthony back in, and let's have a discussion about, truth. Let's talk about knowledge. Is it justified true belief? What is it? In other words, when I look at knowledge, how many theories of knowledge are there? When it comes to truth, are we talking about the correspondence theory of truth? Are we talking about the coherence model of truth? Are we talking about the correspondence theory of truth? Are we talking about the deflationary theory of truth, and so on and so on? And so I could go on all night long about all these different theories of not just truth and knowledge, but about justification and belief. There are various theories or usages, namely of belief, And so we deal with these epistemically and so on. And so with that said, Stephen, jump in and bring some quality to my muttering.
I'll try just not to mutter and add to it. I want to affirm what Bob said, but in a way that advocates for what Anthony is doing. And to do that would mean that starting with something very uncontroversial in epistemology is the idea of warrant being two-pronged, where half of it is about justification, reasons that we believe things that we do, and then another half would be entitlements, which is what Bob is talking about. Some of those would be examples from properly basic beliefs to brute facts to experiential type of, like he's talking about the baby, whether or not it's innate and those sorts of things. So that we can talk about either halves of those, but we have to ask, why is Anthony concerned about one half of that? And so the part that matters to any of us is not that that we can say beliefs that we have that we don't have to justify. They're just what they are, and we feel that way about them. What Anthony is trying to do, rightly so, is saying that beliefs are social things. Justification is a social activity. And when we're talking about God, it may be an idea that has warrant. But when I ask you questions about God and why you think a certain way, I'm asking a social question that has moral and ethical obligations tied to it. Not just, well, here's how I feel about things in a subjective capacity. As he said correctly, we're going to make laws from these beliefs. We're going to issue textbooks and different styles of learning based on these beliefs. And when Anthony is asking someone for their justification, if someone is going to say that they believe something confidently, they have to, as a social, not as an epistemic duty, it is there, an epistemic duty does exist, but as a social moral obligation to say, here's why this is the case, which gives me justification for saying these are the behaviors that we are all going to adopt or assume under that. So those are two ways to talk about things. When we talk about, I think the way I would see Anthony would be is that he is with something called RTB, reliable true beliefs rather than justified true beliefs. Just based on the number of times and repetitive nature of him talking about reliability, which again, you can have incredibly reliable stuff and be incredibly wrong about things. So we have to take into consideration what it is we're talking about when we're going to label some proposition as true. So when I was starting to talk about knowledge a while ago, I was saying that there's a broad range of what we call knowledge, or use the word to identify. Some of those can be acquaintance knowledge or all kinds of things. But what epistemology is very concerned about is statements that are called that statements. I know that something is a state of affairs. And when we say or assert that a state of affairs exists, and this is the description of it, we have to have justification to say this is why this comment is the best one suited to describe those states of affairs. So we might not be able to ever get there as an atheist. We might not ever be able to get there as a theist when we're talking about God. But this is a social question. And so therefore we have to talk about the justifications for things.
For those things or all things?
Well, with this, we're in the kind of street, the SE stuff that we're talking about, we're talking generally about the supernatural, which includes the existence of God or ghosts, or it can include aliens, which Anthony has mentioned before. But you could apply SE to any question, as he's saying. But if you approach it as a social concern, which is why I'm talking so much about the ethics involved in all of this, rather than being Socratic, being a participant in someone else's learning how to think critically about what their belief is. I think Boghossian is fairly much into being trying to convert people to atheism. That's just been my take. It might have evolved something else. I think that's maybe what my take is. I don't think that that's Anthony's concern, but if the concern is to get people to question, then the next thing that's our responsibility as people being inquirers is to know what the means are that we can tell someone, since they haven't ever thought about this, here are some tools that you can use when you go home now and think about it. And I think that that's, for me, what I see lacking most of all. I'm sure there's follow-up. I love that Anthony gives people a business card at the end so they can talk more about it. I think that's fantastic. But anyway, that's one way to cover the basis of how to talk about. We can have a belief in God, but no justification at all, and we're still warranted for that belief, which is what Bob was trying to say before. And there's also the social concern that Anthony's trying to get us to, with there are implications for believing that there is God, and we certainly have to talk about the reasons we're going to say that we know something, because without claiming we know something about God, we can't claim anything about the particular religious dogmas or beliefs about what he's commanding as being matters of knowledge that we can implement in our lives.
I see Anthony nodding over there. Have you something?
I like what you're saying there, Stephen. I would say this, just to clarify. I do think that there are categories of where this applies and categories where it doesn't. For example, if I believe that that the behavior of bullying is going to create developmental psychological harm in some people, I think that I might be thereby justified, based on research, to seek to minimize where bullying is taking place. But if I believe that there is a God, that is a particular belief. I don't believe I have the right to impose anything on anyone as a result of that particular belief, because in that I've come to, as a result of actually thinking through these things and realizing that, yeah, this is a belief that I have, but so what? This is not something that is universally shared, and the reasons we might want to use this to impose on other people are really just the kind of regularities of a social pressure that is trying to get everybody on your team, and
yeah, this is where Anthony comes in great for
right.
that.
Yes,
Yeah,
and so
come on in on this.
So if we're going to impose an idea, I think justification is absolutely essential.
Yeah,
Anthony,
that's my motivation for having these conversations. This is why I go out in my own community, because, and I love how you frame that, Stephen, in terms of that, like a social concern. Yes, people are entitled to believe what they want, but their beliefs do have consequences. The woman who cuts my son's hair at one point was someone who I ran into on the trail, and she had some very strong views on karma. It's important for me to be in a community where people are striving to believe true things. I would define true as that which that which comports with reality. And I'm interested in people who see truth as these are fact claims. These aren't preferences or opinions. There are so many people, I'm sure you run into them as well, folks, that they view truth as subjective, and it's just what you want to believe to be true, and everyone can believe whatever they want. Yes, everyone can believe whatever they want, but they go a step further to say that everyone can believe whatever they want, and those things are literally true because they're believing in them. Those are very scary things. I am seriously worried about humanity if people are viewing truth in those terms, and even possibly going so far as to say, well, everyone can just believe what they want. You really can't know anything, therefore everyone can just believe it. Yeah, if they're not doing any harm. No. That is a very frightening concept to me, and it's one of my motivations for going out and having these talks with folks.
Maybe two things real quick, and then I'll maybe be quiet for the rest of the time. One of them would be to clarify that when I say someone is entitled to a belief, I don't mean that everybody's got a brain and, forget what everybody else wants. I'm gonna in my brain gonna think whatever I want, how I want, because I'm entitled to. That's not at all what an entitlement is. In layman's terms, if you have a belief that you're powerless to reject, then says Dretzky, you have to accept it. Meaning, if I am so compelled to the idea that there's a God, there's nothing I can do to resist it. It would be inauthentic to reject something that I so strongly believe. So that would be something like existence. It would be lots of different things, and God would be included as one of those. So I don't mean that because I want to believe in God or I want to believe in aliens, I'm entitled to believe in aliens. That's not at all.
I got you. Thank you for clearing that up.
Yeah. And then the other thing, and this is for me putting I'm not going to do it in a Socratic method, but I'm going to start Socratically and say, what is it that comports to reality? Because there's only reality and then our ideas about reality. So what is the tie between our ideas? Because it's nothing in the world. This is all mind dependent. It's our ideas comporting to what reality is. So that I could ask that as a question, but I'm stating it as something that should be fairly obvious. And then I'll kind of leave it to you to figure out why it is that justification plays such a big role in tying ideas to sentences that we claim are about states of affairs.
Oh boy, I'm not even sure where to start with that. Can you form that into a question?
Okay. If something the truth is something that comports with reality or corresponds to reality. It's not reality itself. So the question is, what is it?
It refers to reality in some way, right?
What is
right? It's a description of reality.
It's an interpretation of reality.
Yes. Okay.
That's kind
Who
of
knows
how
what
I would
reality is? Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so I guess if you're asking me, like, how would I determine if something is true or if something is real, I suppose it would be something that other people could verify that is happening, that this is testable and repeatable and consistent, I suppose would be some things off of the top of my head.
It's one thing for data to be true and another thing for an interpretation of the data to be true. And you can always find people who will agree with an interpretation and people who won't. And it's quite possible.
But that's determined based upon the hermeneutic that you use, Bob.
Exactly.
Right.
And how do we know which hermeneutic is really the? I certainly would say that nobody has the right to decide that something is true just because they believe it. I mean, that's kind of putting the cart before the horse. Obviously, if you believe something, you think it's true, but that doesn't make it true. And in fact, although I don't believe human beings have anything other than an interpretation of reality, I do believe that reality is something independent of me, and it is the case that which is the case, even if I don't know what it is and I don't possess the ability to even grasp it well. So, I mean, I do believe in an absolute truth. I just don't believe that human beings have any real. Our knowledge of truth is limited to our own capacity to appreciate, to understand. We're the smartest creatures on the earth as far as we know, at least the way that people are talking. But I have to doubt that we really possess the skills or the aptitude to really understand reality for what it actually is. I think that we might be going too far with that. But at the same time, I do think that that in a social situation, we have to recognize that I think we do great harm to each other when we try to. I suppose this is something human beings like to do. I don't know why. Somehow, if I believe something, I seem to need to surround myself with other people who agree with me.
Right.
And that's unfortunate. But one thing I did want to say here is this. I do believe, though, that some people, as Stephen was talking about, there are things that I might resonate with so strongly that I cannot authentically reject it. I do think that some of these people who say, well, I have the right to believe anything I want, I think that attitude is actually a defense mechanism for when people have been attacked for things they cannot help but believe. And I also think that a lot of the silly ideas out there, when I hear atheists say that, well, Christians believe in the God of the gaps. No, they don't. I've never met anybody who believes in the God of the gaps. But I've heard atheists ask Christians questions. Well, how do you explain this? And then maybe a question they never thought of. That has nothing to do with why they believe in God. They're trying to answer a question that's been asked of them, and usually it's a question they've never thought of. So it's not that they believe in a God of the gaps. It's that they believe in God, and now that you've asked them a tough question, they're just trying to come up with an answer that might help. And so I think that is. I think we misunderstand each other, because I tell you, the easiest thing to do in the world is to find somebody who doesn't believe what you do, and you're trying to figure out, well, what's wrong with them, And I think it's quite possible that we might end up as a human race believing all sorts of different things and remaining different and never being able to resolve them. And so what? Let's learn how to get along with each other, quite in spite of it, by actually taking a far more humble position with where it is we find ourselves,
Well, that's the thing about being with the person who disagrees with you.
Oh,
you don't want to say what's wrong with them. You want to say, gee, what could be wrong with what I'm believing? And I think that's where Anthony comes in.
Right, yeah. And by the way, I want to tell you, I watched several of the videos after Dr. Jones showed me, and I liked the idea. I thought it was great. And I think that getting people to think about this I see it as very useful. Perhaps I see its use value a little differently than you do, but I thought it was very useful. And I think being confronted so that I see where I am raw even if I find that that's where I'm left in a raw place, I'm comfortable living in a conundrum. I'm comfortable not having a knowledge of something that I wish I could have, and I can't. And I'm not one of these people who wants to believe things that are true. If something's true and I can know it to be true, then I might be able to know it to be true. And if I have beliefs, I certainly think I can falsify some of those beliefs. But, I'm not going to kid myself that anything that I happen to believe is therefore automatically going to be true, or that I'm going to invest myself in it. But I do live my life in a way where my sense of self is very much affected by my belief in God.
Anthony,
please step into this.
That was one of the hidden surprises of going out and conducting this street epistemology stuff, is that little did I know that the person that I would probably be changing the most was myself, because you do tend to become much more humble in what you claim to believe and what you claim to know. I have a profound respect for believers today than I ever did when I was going through my angry atheist phase, and even past that. Like, you understand how unreliable these foundations are, and I'm just as capable of being in that position. And you tend to have a little bit of empathy or sympathy for humanity, even not just God believers, but everybody, that we're just trying to do the best that we can with the limited information that we have, and try to live good lives. And personally, I like to strive to believe true things. I know Bob probably. I suspect Bob
I sympathize with the desire. I do. I'd like to do that too. I just lost all faith that can really be done. To me, it gets circular. I get to a certain point and I just can't go any farther. And what's beyond that point is outside the ball of my awareness, and I just can't go there. So
Anthony, let me ask you a couple of questions. Does this resonate with you? If I said to you, I have a perspective of truth, not truth itself.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Because what Bob was talking about a few minutes ago, when it comes to scientific method and practice, when it comes to observation is within a controlled environment. And what that means that the interpretation would be a hermeneutical thing. In other words, the methodology behind the interpretation. And you have various methodologies, and this is what scientists are doing all the time. And so when various scientists sit down and look at the data, you're going to have perhaps as many interpretations as you do scientists, simply because there's not just one hermeneutic. And so when it comes to truth, I keep saying we have a perspective of truth, not truth itself, simply because we have multiple theories of truth. Now, I really enjoy the correspondence theory of truth, but I also see the usefulness of looking at the coherence model or theory of truth, the consensus model, and deflationary, and so on and so on. And so it's not like everything just works just and rest upon one axis. And this is why I would encourage people to take a multi-axial approach toward all of it, rather than just park on one axis and preach a sermon. And so I don't know. Let me back up a bit, because I wanted to talk about belief, because this is the term that you use a lot typically when philosophers use it, and Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong, but belief is talked about in epistemology as a propositional attitude. Am I correct? Because if for instance, if an atheist said, I lack belief, actually, in philosophy, philosophers would say, well, actually, the atheist has a belief. In other words, this person, that is, when it comes to the proposition, they have an attitude, they have an opinion, they have a take, they have a stance. Is that correct?
You're not going to get a fight out of me on that. I know we can go to Stephen on this, but yeah, I believe that there are no gods. I'm fully capable of saying that. I don't like the dodge of I lack a belief.
Right.
I used to say that until I started thinking about it a little bit more, and probably even listening to shows like yours and discussions with Ozzy and Aaron and those folks. So yeah, I definitely would say that I am holding a belief that there are no gods.
Okay. Okay. Stephen, when it comes to belief, that is, in the field of philosophy, would that be somewhat what belief is? For the most part, that is the consensus, correct?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know about consensus, but we can.
I understand there are various theories of belief. I get that, but
Yeah.
let's work with it.
It's a good way to define things. There's essentially a draw to what we naturally think is the case without even introspecting on anything. An example would be, something like an entitlement, like the baby going over the glass or not going over the glass. Others would be propositions where it goes beyond the idea that we're drawn to something, but that our ideas can actually be defeated. So there's a case for some sentence, some proposition that we're putting forward. It makes enough sense that it can be true or false. And then what do we make of it after that? And so attitudes can be different about a proposition than about what we're drawn to naturally thinking about. So those are two different ways that some philosophers think about having beliefs.
Now, made an interesting comment just a little while ago. I don't know if we have time for this. Is there a way that we could work in a demonstration of street epistemology? Do we have time for that?
That would be wonderful. So take Bob on, Anthony, and ask him, okay? Bob is the theist, and you're the atheist, and you're taking the Socratic method toward Bob Graves. Here it is. Ozzy,
Well,
are you
we
listening?
can do this.
Ozzy's
We can
in the
do this,
audience,
but-
by the way.
but I
Hey,
don't
hold
think
on,
I'm
Bob.
very-
Hold on, Bob.
Yeah.
Ozzy
Okay.
is in the audience. He's
okay.
going to see how well you do with Anthony. And Anthony, yes, he's sitting by the lily of the valley. No, he's sitting by some wonderful flowers, okay?
Not to intimidate you, but Anthony, Ozzy is praying for me.
Oh, Ozzy.
You guys have
the feeling
fun.
in my bosom, so
I'm going to sit back for 5 minutes and then I'll jump in. Go for
Or
it.
was he Jehovah's Witness? I can't remember. So, I honestly hate to burst your bubble. I hate to do live demonstrations of this because, even though I upload live ones all the time, because if it doesn't go well, people then conclude, that's just a bunch of bunk. So I would direct people to the videos. However, just high level, a very high level, and I've come up with like a little triangle thing to sort of, what's a visual of this? Simply ask a person what they believe, why they believe it, what are their reasons, and how did they figure out that those reasons were reliable. And if you simply ask Socratic questions, can you take me through the process? How are you defining that word? How confident are you that that's true? And listen and repeat it back and start peeling back rather than piling on, which is what we tend to do when we have these chats. I think you'll find that the person that you're talking to probably will begin to discover that their justifications probably aren't as reliable as they thought, and they tend to back off of their certainty. That's basically SE in a nutshell. There are literally hundreds of examples on my channel that I would probably like to guide people to.
Yeah, and I would suggest that people do that too, because if you had run into me on the street, I don't think that I'm the typical theist.
No, I think we would probably get stuck on the definition of belief or something like that. And that's
or
fine.
the fact that I wouldn't claim I have any justification.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be your God belief, though. It could be something else that's meaningful to you.
Like, I mean, a good one here, we were talking about the flowers earlier. Like, are those really tulips over there? Are they real? Are there really tulips there over my right shoulder? That is a claim that could probably be investigated using this method. So yes, you don't have to.
Right.
Yes, I think if I ran into Bob, I'd probably be like, why do you actually think that you have a tennis lesson later today or something? I probably wouldn't want to get into your God belief.
And we could go out and have a beer later.
Yes, exactly.
So are you saying that if you ran into Bob and you filmed it, it wouldn't be on your channel?
That's hard to say.
It depends how it went. But it could be an example. By the way, I would also say that some of the, when it comes to putting something on your YouTube channel, you're looking for something that will be of interest to viewers.
Right.
And as a result here, if we were interested in doing research, then we'd want to see all of the examples. but we're not doing research here. He's running a YouTube channel, and let's be honest, he can't run it. Most people don't understand or appreciate how real research is extremely mundane, and we're trying to extract from that research significant data to statistically analyze. And so,
I wish it was that rigorous. Honestly, I'm going out with a camera and I'm stopping every other person or people that look friendly. This is not scientific. And but yes, there is a certain element of, will this resonate with the people who I want to watch this method and be enthralled with it and want to learn more about it. So
I applaud you. I think it's great. I enjoyed the videos I watched. I thought it was great.
Cool.
Really did.
We are going to have links to those to Anthony's channel and his videos.
Sure.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And there are times where I'll go out and I'll live stream so people can see what does 4 hours of this look like. So you can see the ones where we talk about a person's, whether they think that the tulips are real or they have a tennis lesson later that day, or if their God is real or not. And then I might upload one of those 10 conversations, perhaps.
Yeah.
It's getting quiet.
Yeah.
I do want to mention, in the context of the belief conversation, there's a distinction between like these two different kinds of beliefs, and maybe this relates to the idea of being subjective and objective beliefs, and the fact that people have beliefs that refer to, say, like content of reality that they've discovered, and then there's the beliefs that have to do with how they interpret their experience. So, there's the interpretive beliefs, and then there's the beliefs that they come about from experience.
Yeah, I mean,
that's true.
There's a big difference between representationalism, dispositionalism, interpretationism, functionalism, and so on. You've got many categories, and this is what I keep trying to nuance, and I'm not speaking well at all tonight.
And I tend to call those things working beliefs. I'm going to work from this.
Yes.
It's really
that's why language is what we are working with, and this is why I would argue for clarity. If I could offer anything of value that is to you, Anthony, I would encourage you to be as clear as you can with people, because I think that that's the honest approach, to give them something to work with. If they seemingly go way over here, go with them and try to work where they are. So many times I've had people. Go ahead.
I was going to say, sometimes we encounter people who, well, maybe like I was when I first started, I would conflate belief and knowledge, and I just never really gave it a lot of thought. We've even started, we just uploaded a short 3-minute conversation or a 4-minute conversation. It wasn't my talk, but somebody else who's going out and doing this. His name is Reed with Cordial Curiosity. He had a 4-minute conversation with a woman who, he said, I'm going to make a claim, and let's just talk about how you can determine if this claim is true or not. And he made 3 claims: one that he owned a car, one that he owned a Ferrari, and one that he owned a spaceship. And it was this wonderful, friendly little back and forth. And in the end, I think she had a better understanding of expressing certainty and being a little bit more humble in claiming what we don't know and what it would take to change my mind. So sometimes you run into a full-blown expert, an academic who's studied epistemology, and they're a theologian and they know the Bible inside and out. And sometimes you might stumble into a person who's never critically thought or was given those tools to begin with. So to your point, Michael, I think, meeting a person where they're at is extremely crucial, and this isn't about beating a person down or trying to make yourself feel better. You have to set your ego aside, and this is about honest conversation to help understanding and to possibly have both parties walk away with having learned something.
The most transformative aspect of SE, I think, for those that have practiced it, is the fact that the first step to SE is getting to know what someone's perspective is, and that is a way of kind of practicing empathy, right? Exercising your theory of mind a little bit, and that's, I think, what gradually shifted our perspectives about why we do it.
How arrogant to assume that you're using the words that I'm using, and these meanings of words, we're going off of my definition, and you're just using it wrong. Like, that's just getting off on the wrong foot, and that's not going to really help anybody understand each other. So I love the approach, and it seems to be catching on. And yes, I think it's catching on in the atheist community, and we seem to see it spreading outside of it slowly. But this isn't just an atheist thing. This is a tool that I would love to see everybody here using it, and all your viewers who are watching this, regardless of where you stand on the big question.
And especially Aaron, we'd love to see that.
Aaron and Anthony, video 2. Maybe we can make that happen. I don't know.
Well, I would love to have both of you guys on this show. That would be wonderful, because Aaron, when it comes to faith, pistis, if I get into a conversation with him concerning what the ancients, their usages of pistis, he's not going to go there. He's going to stay with one thing in mind, because it's as if he wants to win something, as in checkers or chess, instead of trying to look through their lens or through their eyes. I just don't get it. And so that's why I'm trying to encourage you to, go where people are, work with them instead of against them. I think that's a better approach.
I'd like to make a prediction based on an observation. I predict that this show is not going to be a very popular one, because it's not very heated. Seems like there's more concern about communicating and doing it in a kind way than there is arguing. And all I can say about that is that anyone that would rather have all the arguments and the bickering and the I'm right, you're wrong, must not have ever experienced what we're experiencing here this evening, because this is so relaxing. It's so enjoyable to listen to one another, respect one another, and actually learn something.
Yeah, welcome to my YouTube channel. I don't have a lot of subscribers, and I don't have a lot of views, because I think the content is generally pretty calm and respectful, like you see here. And that's kind of a sad reflection, I think, on humanity, like where we're at. We're drawn to the fight. We want to see people arguing and duking it out. I mean, that has its place, but I think, if you're an atheist watching this, or you're a theist watching this, and you're tired of that, and you're ready to graduate to something a little bit more productive, then I think street epistemology is the next available thing for you.
Thank you for reminding me. I checked to make sure that I'm subscribed to your channel, and yes, indeed, I am. Yay!
Thank you, Diane. I'm glad to have you.
Okay, we're going to get into final comments tonight.
Sure.
Daryl, what say you? Did you enjoy the show?
I did, and I kind of just made mine. I mean, I don't know. To me, it doesn't get much better than this. Why would anyone not feel welcome to come express themselves in a setting like this? So the invitation's open.
Sounds good. Jordan, final thoughts.
In Stephen's blog, on his first thoughts on street epistemology, he talked about how he prefers using a pedagogical approach, where it's two interlocutors that are taking on an attitude of learning. And I definitely agree with that. That's precisely the way to do SE well, is to have an open mind, to be open to learning, to revising your perspective. And I've mentioned this actually here on NCG before. I have a personality, I think, that is very conducive to teaching. And so that's where SE really resonated with me. That's what drew me in when I saw the effect that Anthony was having on his interlocutors. And I think that's what you'll notice among most people that adopt SE, is that the fact that it allows them to have honest and civil conversations with people in a way that they hadn't done before.
Diana, final thoughts. I am really, really happy the way this conversation has gone. I personally believe that street epistemology can be a very useful tool to allow people to examine their beliefs and see, excuse me, see if they want to keep them or revise them. And street epistemology is not a final product as far as I understand it. It is evolving. It will continue to evolve. One thing I'd really love to see is a street epistemic conversation about street epistemology. How's that for a meta-analysis?
That's pretty good. Pretty good. Stephen, what say you? Final thoughts.
Oh, goodness. I try and do a good job of tearing folks down, but what I really want to do after that is build them back up. And that usually means helping people understand through the questioning of what they believe, what it is that they believe and why it's important. And once they figure out what's important to them, whether it's social binding, like for religion or whatever, then they can take on the question without being so fearful that everything for them is going to change. They'll understand which aspects of, let's say, religion lead into the thing that's most important, because it's not the religious experience, it's a social experience. For conversations like this I've been involved with for a number of years, my concern is, and which is why I got out of Facebook, is because I just started tearing people down. Stopped building people back up. Well, let me just put it this way. What I would try to do for Anthony, if it's at all possible, is arm him, or he knows the apologists and how they're going to come at him, but might not know a good way to counter and might discourage him from what he's doing. So this would be what I'm clumsily trying to explain, is that he could experience the same kind of experience someone would have when he's talking to them doing SE. I don't want that to happen to him, because I want him to know a fuller range of how to think of any problem, so that when he runs out of justification, he can admit to what are just the ways he's in particular set to look at things, and then what matters about the kinds of questions being asked, so that it's less threatening for him when he's essentially being attacked by an apologist. So the idea for both of that is analogous, so that he's aware when he's doing his SE thing that he's not doing the same thing that he would like to disarm apologists from doing. So it's kind of like my getting rid of Facebook for me is all analogous to, I don't want to do to Anthony what I think Anthony might have a tendency, without even knowing it, to do to people that he's engaging with, which is he's coming in with knowledge of a subject that people probably haven't listened to or even thought of before. And that's very, somebody definitely has the upper hand in those conversations. And with that upper hand comes a higher degree of responsibility. And this is where I get off of the Socratic method, that it's more about participation, his participation in why he's asking this social question to another human. And if it's just so that they lose confidence, then you need to do something else. But I don't really get that at all from Anthony. So I just want to applaud him and say, keep going forward with what you're doing, and think about the full picture of the ethical scope of what happens to a person when they do question their beliefs, especially very dearly held ones, and then how maybe you could be an aid to them thinking through it and solving their own problems.
That was good. I just read one of the comments as you were ending, and it said that Trump's orange hair is awesome.
Discuss.
Nice,
That's funny, Bob.
There.
Come on. I mean, Trump's orange hair.
Stay focused, viewer. Come on.
I tell you what, I'm having a hard time. I had to get off the set several times during the show, and I apologize for that. But I don't have a cough switch up here on stage, and so I had to go cough back there. Wow, this has been a lot of fun. What are your final thoughts, Bob?
Well, I think this is a very effective and useful tool. I'd like to see more of it. I would even like to see people who are theistic approach people who are atheists with this kind of. I'm sure that there's going to be atheists out there who have rather firm and solid beliefs, as well as atheists who are going to discover that they're not. And these, even as Anthony mentioned, that he found that that this was in some ways humbling. It toned down his attitude, which actually brought him into more of a pluralistic, cooperative attitude. I would say this, that I think that that I would also want to say that I think there's many methods out there that we can use to grow and teach and to discover ourselves, because we're all, we are a multiplex. Being human involves numerous axes of person development, of identity and sense of self and what's important. If you were to go to different cultures and say, complete this sentence with in 5 different ways, I am, and then in different cultures you're going to get a whole different set of responses for, I am a person who plays guitar, I'm a professor, I'm a husband, or you might get people talking about such things as the way people think of themselves in response to that question will be different from culture to culture, with a different emphasis. Some will be talking about what goes on inside of them. Others will talk about their role that they play in the earth with other people. And as a result, I think that it's important to recognize that each of us are a unique combination of very common human elements. And that this is just one of the many ways that we can learn and explore ourselves. So I think it's great, and I would encourage Anthony to keep it up. And I'll definitely be watching more of his videos. And I particularly appreciated his very easygoing style, very non-confrontational, really trying to draw out of people a great deal of a comfortable response. And I think that is good. The last thing I would say is this: we really need a world that it would be better off, in my opinion. Maybe this is one of my beliefs, that we need to learn what it is like to live in a world where people honestly see things very differently. Maybe we can come to agreement on some things, maybe we can't, but we certainly need to be talking about it. And I do think that we need to appreciate and even understand how other people think. I think it's a very good thing to try to genuinely appreciate the strengths and weaknesses of an idea you don't personally embrace. And you can only do that by having a decent conversation with others who get to talk at length about, the give and take of where they're at. And as a result, I think that it'll just help you to appreciate other human beings so much more, which is something I think Anthony testified as what he experienced in doing this. He developed a profound respect for people who think and believe things he doesn't. And so that's wonderful. I'm a strong believer in our need to be in communication with each other.
Final thoughts, Anthony.
Wow, what a pleasure it was to be here with you tonight. This was great. This went, I expected this to go very well, and it seemed like it did. And it was just really nice to hear everyone's perspectives. And thank you for allowing me to share with you this approach of SE. Diana, we do SE on SE. There is a Facebook group called Chat with a Street Epistemologist, where we discuss the merits of the approach and how do we actually know that this is helping or hurting. So that's out there.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah, take a look. There are actually 4 Facebook groups for street epistemology, and that's one where we actually role play as well as examine our own views on things, including SE. And we're looking to improve. We really are. We want to get better at this. That's why we put the videos out. We turn on comments because we want to get feedback from people, and we participate in interviews like this. And we're looking for apologists who are critical of it. We want people who who are familiar with motivational interviewing or psychotherapy or philosophy, linguistics. We want experts to watch these videos and give us suggestions on how we can improve. We are completely open to that. And then maybe finally, one of you, I think, I can't remember who, I think it was Stephen, you were touching on the importance of being there for people afterwards. And we recognize now, several years into this, that this could be very difficult. This is a difficult process. People that I've met on camera have started the journey on their belief abandonment process. And it's not an easy thing. So we do have an obligation to be there, and we are working with organizations. We have close ties, I should say, with organizations who are there to help people who might be going through a difficulty when they're abandoning a belief. And I think that's a big, we have a responsibility to do that when we're engaging in these conversations. So I guess in closing, thank you so very much, Michael, for conceiving this idea and inviting me on your show. And I just really had a wonderful time. Thank you.
You're an awesome person. We were honored to have you on, to be honest with you. And let me say this.
Agreed.
For years, I've been saying that I'm committed to a process, not a conclusion. I think some people are catching on to that, because anytime that you park your brain, it's not going to go well. Things are changing rapidly. You look at the scientific community, and it's a wonderful community, but things are in flux. And so I'm encouraging people to be committed to a process, not a conclusion. What does that mean? It simply means that we work with conclusions, we work through conclusions, but we're committed to that process. And also, we need to be compassionate. That's one of the things that I really liked about Anthony. He has a lot of compassion for people. He's patient, he's kind, he's long-suffering, he's gentle. Did you notice his humility? I mean, that was outstanding. He doesn't claim to know it all. If he gets stuck, what does he do? How does he respond? In anger? Is he an asshole? No, not at all. What he's trying to do is show you not just intellect. He's trying to ask questions. He's trying to do something for people, because he finds that in doing something for someone else, he's actually doing something for himself. And so he's very much a humanist. He's not wanting to look at humanism, but he's wanting to look at humanism 2.0 possibly. And so let's upgrade what humanism is. Let's upgrade what compassionism is. Let's see if we can move forward together regardless of our beliefs or whatever. Okay? Good night.